Let's take a moment for prayer. I've got some of Mount Zion's members, and I've invited the AME Zion Ministerial Alliance so that our pastors would have the opportunities to share this particular information with their congregations if they have not already invited some of them now, since this is good, specific information. And at some point, toward the end, Brother Huey, we'd like to ask some questions. I'm sure there are going to be some persons who have questions, so you just tell us when you're ready for the questions. If you have questions, write your questions down so that we don't interrupt Brother Huey while he's presenting, and I think that would make for a more orderly meeting. Those of you who are on the Ministerial Alliance meeting, when we finish this particular segment, then we will just go into our regular Ministerial Alliance meeting on our regular conference call, okay? So with that, I'm going to offer prayer, and then we are going to get going. I've got so many gadgets plugged up. I'm trying to quieten one down for the conference call at Mount Zion, just in case somebody logs in there as opposed to Zoom. Father, we thank you for today and for the privilege to be alive and to be workers in your vast vineyard. We praise you for salvation and for family members, for friends. We thank you for the governmental institutions that are established. Although we have some reservations about some things that are happening now and have some great displeasure, we ask you for wisdom, we ask you for faith and courage so that we will do what we're supposed to do as your children. And ultimately, always, we ask you to protect us, because your word declares, except you watch over the city, the watchmen watch in vain. And so we put our lives always in your hands, and we thank you that you are God on our side. We ask you to bless us tonight with the wisdom and knowledge you are supplying, and cause us to have wisdom as we receive it, so that we would govern ourselves and help others to be governed accordingly. And then we ask for your divine intervention so that the safety would be there. Bless preachers and lay persons alike. We are all your children, and we stand in need of your safety. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I've invited Mr. Huey Thornton. He's retired from the Montgomery Police Department, retired, I think, from the Reserve or the National Guard, I can't remember, and is presently a chief of security for Southern Poverty Law Center here in Montgomery, Alabama. So his whole life is about security, about law enforcement as a man, and he's a faithful trustee here at Mount Zion. So, Brother Huey, if you take it away now, I'm going to mute myself so that if I sneeze, they can't hear me. Okay. If I snort, they can't hear me. So take it away, and we thank you for consenting to provide the workshop for us, or the forum tonight, and we're all ears.
Okay, thank you, Reverend. I'm going to share my screen for those of you who are on Zoom. Okay, let me get my guard dog under control here for just a second. Good afternoon. And first, I want to thank the Reverend and Mount Zion for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight for a few minutes on the do's and don'ts of police interactions. I think this is a very important subject, particularly for the youth who may come into contact with law enforcement and may not have the knowledge to have a good or successful interaction with police. And so thanks for the opportunity. And I want to apologize too for those of you who showed up last week, I can only say that getting old is rough. The Reverend and I laughed about that at church on Sunday, but definitely, I feel like at least this is a very important subject, and I'm pleased to have been asked to come and present on this. Um, this is kind of what we will cover today. Basically, the do's and don'ts are if you are a pedestrian and you're stopped by the police, or if you're searched by the police, the do's and don'ts. If you're stopped while you're driving a vehicle, the do's and don'ts. And, if you actually have the unfortunate event of being arrested by the police, what are some of the do's and don'ts? And, basically we want to share with you how you can navigate these type situations with law enforcement safely. And the goal here is just to provide information, like I said, especially to our youth, on how to make good decisions if they have a police encounter. I think it's important for us to understand and know that, we do have rights when it comes to actually having a police encounter or being stopped by the police. But it's also important to understand too that our primary objective is to make it through that encounter without being physically harmed or injured or anything like that. So it's important to understand, when and use good judgment on the side and when to exercise those rights. I mean, if you see a situation where the officer starts to act in an aggressive manner toward you, at some point you have to make a decision on how far you want to take this and whether or not you believe, exercising the rights that you have is something you need to do at that time, or if maybe you need to actually wait and complain against the law enforcement officer once you are no longer in a potentially harmful situation. I mean, that's something that you just have to weigh the options on. I think that we need to understand too, and our youth need to understand that you could be at the right place doing the right thing, and you still could potentially be stopped by a police officer. There may be something that's going on in the area that you don't know about. So it's very important to understand, again, what your rights are. And, you definitely don't want to end up in a situation where you're providing information that could potentially self-incriminate you, or provide information that could cause you to be in a situation uh, or actually get yourself involved in a situation that you had nothing to do with. So understand that if a police officer stops you, and this is a question that I've received quite often, if a police officer stops you, what information do you have to give to the police officer? Well, there's a state law that basically says that you do have to provide your identity if you're asked by a police officer to provide your identity. If you're stopped and asked to provide your identity, then you do have to provide that information. But you don't have to provide any other information. You have a constitutional right to actually not provide any information outside of your identity. And given the circumstances, you have to judge whether or not it's important to you, and whether or not it's beneficial to you to provide any additional information at that point. Because you can at all times exercise your right to be silent. And coming from my professional knowledge and having, conducted police stops, I can tell you that if you decide this is something you want to do, you need to do it early on and not start providing information, even though you have the constitutional right to do that, but not start providing information and then stop, because then it kind of, makes you look like you have something to hide. It becomes suspicious if you start providing information and then you stop providing information in the middle of the conversation. And so it's very important to understand that. You can always ask too, if a police officer stopped you, you can always ask at any point, am I free to leave? And if they say so, then it's very important to leave, calmly, not make a scene or not say anything that's going to provoke the officer to engage in further contact with you. Because if the officer say that you're not free to leave, then that kind of takes the whole scenario or situation at least to another level, because at that point you're being detained. And in order to detain someone, you have to have a reasonable suspicion or probable cause that that person has committed a crime. And so at that point, then it's taking it to that level to where the officer has to be able to articulate that to a judge or anybody else who may question that. And so, at any point, I would say do ask, am I free to leave, if you feel like you're at a point where you're ready to leave and you don't feel like you've done anything wrong. And the officer, unless he has reasonable suspicion or probable cause, has to let you leave, basically. Uh, don't try to run away. I mean, we've seen it in the news, and we've seen situations where basically officers who are not, following the policies and following the law themselves, do things that are very unconstitutional and even deadly at some times, when people choose to actually run from the police. So it's very important to not try to run away from the police, and because it could lead to something that's potentially deadly. Don't physically resist a pat down or a search, because this could also lead to the officer using unnecessary illegal force against you. Again, say, I don't consent to search, because unless an officer has patted you down, and really the law basically says that you can pat a person down, and if you feel something that appears to be illegal in their pocket or on their person, then you have a right to retrieve it. But that's the only time that an officer can do that, and unless you give consent. And so if you don't consent to a search, then make sure that you verbally give that information to the officer, and be respectful about it, but verbally give that information that you do not consent to searches. And that way the officer, unless, like I said, unless the officer can articulate a constitutional, reason for doing that, then it's illegal. The search itself is illegal. And anything that, that's derived from that search become what we call fruit of the poisonous tree. Basically, it's stuff that you received as a result of an illegal search, or evidence that you received as a result of an illegal search, and it's not admissible in court. And don't disrespect of the police officer. Although we know we have constitutional rights, this could lead to the officer, you know, uh, uh, using the illegal force again, or unusual or unnecessary force, or it could lead to the stop itself, escalating to a point where it doesn't have to escalate to, just by the mere fact that, the officer feel like he's been disrespected or his authority has been disrespected. So, don't be disrespectful. We always want to take the high road when it comes to police contact and police, having contact with police officers. We always want to take the high road, and never have our position be below, what it should be, in order to actually articulate that in court, or to his supervisor, whoever we have to speak to in reference to the search or stop. Don't lie. I can tell you, it's very important that you tell the truth. And if you feel like you got to lie, the best thing to do is just remain silent, because you have a right to remain silent. Because I've seen numerous times where once you say something one time, it's hard to actually repeat that. If you have to ask, if you asked again 5 or 10 minutes down the road, then you say something different, then you create a situation where there's additional calls for the officer to further investigate. So if you feel like you got to lie, then the best thing to do is just remain silent. Don't forget that the police are legally allowed that police officers can use means that are less than truthful and intimidating. They can bluff, and they can get information, based off of those type tactics. So it's very important that if you know what the truth is, you know, stick to the truth, and don't be bluffed or intimidated into saying anything other than what the truth is. And for people who are immigrants, you don't have to discuss your citizenship status or your immigration status with anyone other than your lawyer. Uh, these are kind of like the do's and don'ts of police searching. We have a constitutional right, our Fourth Amendment right to illegal searches. And so we don't have to agree to any searches that we feel are unreasonable, unless now the police officer has some sort of reasonable suspicion that you're involved in a crime. Then they can't search you unless you give consent. I can't say that enough. That if you're not involved in any criminal activity, and the police officer can't articulate that you involved in a criminal activity, they're not going to just go in to search you. They're going to ask you for consent to search, and you do not have to agree to searches. I mean, I know some people who basically, if an officer asks you, I've seen people on the street just basically say, "I don't consent to searches," and at that point, if the police officer continues with a search and there's not probable cause or reasonable suspicion to believe that person has committed a crime, I've seen cases lost like that because of the simple fact that the person did not consent to the search, so their Fourth Amendment rights were violated. Uh, and like I said, you just got to make sure that you articulate that and you verbalize it when the officer stopped you and asked you for if you do consent to a search. And I was saying earlier, a police officer can, if you're in an area where they can articulate that they're suspicious of your activities or suspicious of what you're doing in a particular area, then a police officer can stop you and for their safety, pat down the outer part of your clothes. But that's about it. And then they can ask you what your name is. But and that's the only information that you actually have to give at that point. So do give your name, and that's about all the information that you have to give at that point, unless, like I said earlier, you feel like this is going to be escalated into a situation that's going to involve a whole lot of force or something like that from the officer, then you may want to give a little additional information just to kind of de-escalate the situation. But it's your constitutional right that you don't have to give anything other than your name and date of birth. Don't empty your pockets or reach toward your waistband or anything like that as the officer approaches, because that could be considered as an act of aggression from the officer, from you at least, toward the officer. And so it's very important that you don't do that, because it could very well lead to the officer using force, up to deadly force, against you, which could kind of, I guess, support a false claim that they are false, or even real claim that they believe you were reaching for a gun in your waistband. So don't make any unusual moves or toward your pocket or waistband or anything like that when you're being approached by an officer. During traffic stops, if you're pulled over, and as a police officer, I can imagine that most officers now feel like, you would think at least, that anything that they say or do is being recorded. And if you have anything to actually record this, having to make unusual moves, anything like that, hold on just a second, my internet is kind of. But if you have any way of recording it, hands-free devices or anything like that you can activate before the officer actually make contact with you, without making any unusual moves that appear that you're going under the seat or in the back seat or in the glove compartment to retrieve a weapon or anything like that, then it it's to your benefit to do that, because any evidence that you have to support the fact that you were doing what you're supposed to, if the stop were to go wrong, is definitely beneficial to you if you have to go to court, or if you have to speak with that officer supervisor, or if you have to use that later on for your defense. do keep your hands. This is very important, and it's something that officers are trained in the police academy, is to wash their hands. So if you're pulled over by a police officer, make sure that you keep your hands on the steering wheel so the officer can see it. And if you need to get anything out of your pocket, or if you need to get anything out of the glove compartment or out of the back seat, make sure that you verbalize that to the officer. You know, like say, I'm going to reach into the glove compartment to get my insurance and registration proof. Because you know, many people don't do that, and we've had, you know, several situations here recently where officers are saying that, you know, the person was reaching for something, or was trying to get a weapon out of the glove compartment, or I thought he might have been reaching for a weapon, and these situations didn't turn out good at all. So it's very important that you set yourself up for success by making sure that you have your hands where the officers can see them, because like I said, that's one of the things that they train officers in the police academy, is that wash their hands. There's nothing they can do to you with their eyes, their mouth, or anything else. Wash their hands. And so officers are trained to wash their hands, and they react off of what you do with your hands. So if your hands are on the steering wheel, then you don't pose a threat to them, or you shouldn't pose a threat to them. Make sure that you're prepared to show that. Make sure you know where your license and your registration and your proof of insurance is. Don't have it somewhere in your car where you have to search for it and spend time, you know, looking under the seat and in the glove compartment and things like that. Because the more time you spend in that, then spending doing that, then the more time you have to spend with the officer. It's good to actually know where, have all that stuff somewhere where you know where it is, and it's easily retrievable, so that you can show it to the officer and the officer can move on, as opposed to having to wait and wondering if you're actually trying to look for a weapon or anything like that. And if you given a ticket by the officer, then you're required by the law, you have to sign the ticket, because otherwise you may be taken into custody. Because when you actually are given a ticket, you're being arrested. You're just being released on your own recognizance. But if you don't sign the ticket, then it becomes a situation where the officer can actually make a custodial arrest on the spot. So do sign the ticket if you come into contact with an officer, whether you feel like you deserve the ticket or not. You can always defend that when you have your day in court, not right there on the street, because I can tell you that a situation like that, if an officer feel like that he's going to write you a ticket, that you've committed a moving violation, then it's going to be very hard to convince him that that's not the case. And so what you need to do is take your evidence or whatever you may have to show that you didn't do that, and try to fight it in court, as opposed to there on the street, because it's just only going to cause the situation to escalate. And if for some reason, you know, you pulled over and the officer detect that maybe you've had alcohol, it's important that, you know, first off, it's important not to drink and drive. Don't do that. But if you do, realize that if you don't take the breathalyzer test, then your driver's license are going to automatically be suspended. So if you know that you're not intoxicated, I would definitely recommend taking the breathalyzer test. Uh, do keep your interior vehicle clear of unnecessary objects. You know, it may give the officer reason to, if he can't see what's in your vehicle, you know, it may give them reason to actually want to search your vehicle to kind of see what's in there. So just make sure that you know, anything that that you don't necessarily need in the passenger compartment of your vehicle that causes it to be cluttered up and stuff like that, that you put it in the trunk or somewhere, so it doesn't create a situation where they think that there may be additional evidence in the vehicle. And again, like I said, if an officer, after he pull you over, uh, you know, apparently if he don't have enough probable cause or suspicion that he's developed as a result of the stop to actually conduct a search, and he asks you for consent, you always have a right to say that I don't consent to searches. And at that point, unless the officer, like I said, have the probable cause that he can articulate in front of a judge to actually conduct the search, then the officer should let you go. You know, don't physically resist. Uh, don't physically resist if you know, if you, after you've said that you don't consent to a search and the officer continues to search anyway, don't physically resist it, because it's just going to cause the situation to actually escalate. You know, you just need to make sure that you verbalize several times that I don't consent to this search. And at that point, like I said, if the officer continues and he conducts a search that's illegal, then, you know, if you get a good attorney, you can always have that evidence, if there is evidence retrieved during the search. You can always have it thrown out of court as because it's actually it's evidence that was actually uh, received as a result of a illegal search. You know, and like I said again, don't refuse to sign a ticket, because that could definitely lead you to being taken into custody and taken downtown as well. And again, I can't say enough, because this is something that, you know, we've seen recently result in young people being killed by the police, and that is, don't make unusual moves, like searching for your driver's license or registration, until you've actually said, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to reach for my registration now, so that there's no question as to what you're doing. And if the officer said, don't do that, then put your hands back on the steering wheel and don't do it. Because at the end of the day, you know, if you've been physically harmed, or even worse, killed, then, you know, you haven't benefited yourself, or you haven't accomplished anything. Uh, you know, you can always, like I say, have your day in court, or have your day in front of the supervisor with the officer if you feel like you were done wrong. Again, like I said, you know, as having been a police officer, it's always, you know, you're supposed to be always respectful to everybody that you stop, and you're supposed to always, you know, unless they take it to a level where you know, you have to be a little more stern. But, you know, you, even if the officer approach you in an aggressive manner, you know, be respectful. You got to always be above reproach when it comes to a situation where you have to actually talk to a supervisor or talk to the court about what an officer did. And so don't give them fuel to use against you in the court, because I can tell you that, you know, in most cases, uh, uh, you're going to be recorded, and in some cases, you may only what need to be recorded in order to articulate the other side may be recorded. So you need to make sure that you're very respectful, and that you don't give any evidence or any fuel to actually be used against you in this type of situation. And, you know, don't attempt to bribe an officer, because it's just not going to work. And that's more than likely going to be recorded, and it also gives an indication that maybe that you're guilty of what it is they pull you over for, or what they stop you for. So, you know, don't do that. If you are arrested and you're taken to the police station, uh, you know, it's very important to know what your rights are in relations to an arrest. I mean, you have to be read your Miranda rights anytime you are arrested, and basically your Miranda rights say that you have a right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney, and if you feel like that's what's necessary, then don't say anything. Just remain silent and clearly state that I want my attorney. And by doing that, then you've exercised your rights. And at that point, any questioning of you should stop until your attorney arrives. If you've been arrested, you know, we've seen, like I said, in some of these recent situations where a person tried to run or tried to resist or fight back, or, you know, don't do any of this type stuff, because it only causes the situation to escalate. And, you know, we've seen some pretty serious situations escalate into the death of people, and serious harm, physical harm being caused to people recently. And so that's definitely not something that we want to happen. And so, the best thing to do in a situation like that is understand that at this particular time, you know, resisting or fighting back is not going to help the situation in at all. I mean, you have to live to fight another day in court or at police headquarters with the supervisor of this person rather than taking it, right there on the street to as something that you need to do. Because I can guarantee you that unless you're in some dark alley somewhere where there's nobody else around, if an officer is doing something that's illegal to you and he's conducting an arrest, someone's going to have it on video. You can best believe that someone's going to have it on video, because that's the first thing people do these days is pull their video cameras out. So you don't want to be seen on video resisting or fighting back or anything like that. So the best thing to do is not resist and use the system the way it's designed to be used in order to deal with a situation like that. Uh, you like I said again, you don't have to give you don't have to give any information other than your identity, and basically that's what your Miranda rights are going to say. They're going to read you your Miranda rights, and that's what it's going to say, and you have the right to exercise those rights. We talked about this in all the different type scenarios that we've talked about thus far, and understanding your right to searches and seizures is something that's very important. uh, you know, and don't talk about what's going on on the telephone or with anyone, because who knows what's being recorded and what can be spliced or whatever to say whatever it is that need to be said in order to articulate or better support the police officer's side if the police officer is doing something illegal or immoral or anything like that. Who knows how much of that conversation can be spliced or used against you. And it could be that you said one thing and the whole scenario was taken out of context because just part of the conversation was used in order to get the warrant or to actually uh, for the judge to give them a search or a warrant or anything like that, or they can use part of it. And don't make any decisions if you exercise your Miranda rights. Then at that point, don't make any decisions without your lawyer knowing about it. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there, Reverend. I think I've covered basically most of what I wanted to cover this evening, and then I'm going to ask if there are any questions or any ideas that anyone may have out there that we can provide that will better, help our youth in particular in with police encounters.
Thank you very much. The first question I want to ask before we open up to the floor is, can we get all of what you just said so we can duplicate it, Brother Huey, for our different churches?
Yes.
All those do's and don'ts. Very good. Um, I want to hopefully encourage some of us to say that I have experienced what Brother Huey said 2 or 3 different times where I was stopped by police officers and given a ticket, and I beat it in court every time, ever since I was 16 years old. So it can happen, um, thrown out most of the time. I did have to pay some money though when I was 16 in Wetumpka, Alabama, in a predominantly white county. But I said to my mom, I was not driving 82 miles an hour. I don't even know if the old car I was driving would go 82 miles an hour. Literally, I was driving about 52, but somebody else was driving 82 that speeded around me, and the state trooper gave me the ticket instead of the rightful person. So know that it can happen, but it's also happened to me as an adult, leaving here at Mount Zion, going to Mount Pleasant for the death of someone after I just finished the funeral, and the white police officer gave me a ticket on Day Street, and I took him to court and won again. So it can happen. Um, However, we've got all of this good information. Brother Huey, my personal question is, what will happen to me if I don't move my hands off the steering wheel? Because from what we're seeing, it certainly appears that if I'm stopped by the police officer and don't already have my ID, registration information, insurance information already in a package, which I'm going to make sure I do myself, and maybe just put it in an envelope over the sun visor or something, just keep one there. I'd hate to take my hands off of the steering wheel right now to reach in the glove compartment or in my wallet with what the white police officers have done to black men in this time. Because even if I'm not doing something threatening, according to the videos we're seeing, we're still being shot when we're not doing anything threatening. So from my perspective, I think I'd rather for them to just take me to jail, and for the people at the jail and make my phone call, and call you or Elton or somebody to come and get me, because I'd feel better paying a fine downtown than to take a chance reaching in my glove compartment to get my registration and insurance, or for sure reaching in my back pocket to get my wallet and insurance card. I just feel totally at a disadvantage as a black man right now in America if the police stop me. And I was thinking this driving to Brunswick, Georgia last week to help bury my brother-in-law. I'd rather just be taken to jail. I don't know if that's considered a favorable option, but for me, it almost seems like a life and death option. I know everybody doesn't get killed or gets pulled over, but as we often say, one person is too many to die when they're not doing anything threatening the police officer. Fortunately, all my experiences, except the 2 or 3 tickets, has been magnificently wonderful. But from that all happened before the last 10 years. And from what we've seen just the last 2 to 3 years, it's becoming more horrific as the months go by. So how bad is it if we just want to be taken on to the police station rather than to reach for our ID, registration, etc.?
I would say, Reverend, like I said during the presentation, uh, until the officer walks up to the vehicle and actually asks you for your registration and your proof of insurance and driver's license, to keep your hands on the steering wheel, and then articulate to the officer, like I said, what you're doing. I'm reaching for my driver's license, so there's no misconception as to what's going on, because you know some of these incidents that you're talking about, these were just riding police officers who have basically tarnished the badge for those who are out there every day doing what they're supposed to, day in and day out, who have regular families that they go home to, and they want to go home safely. But at the end of the day, some of the time, despite even your best efforts, if you happen to run into some of these people who have infiltrated the law enforcement profession, who are white supremacists and stuff like that. And that's, working at Southern Poverty Law Center, that's some of the stuff that we look at. And we know that there's been a huge infiltration into the law enforcement arena and into the military. And so, some of the time, despite even your best effort, you may end up in a situation like that. And so the best thing to do is to hope that you have a situation like the lieutenant in North Carolina, where it's being recorded and somebody see it and it doesn't lead to a deadly type situation. Because I think that the situations that did lead to deadly encounters, there wasn't even an option for the person just to go to jail. So the best thing to do is just try to put yourself in the best position to survive by basically keeping your hands where the officer can see them, and not doing anything to try to escalate the situation when you see someone who you know is overly aggressive?
I would follow up, and this would be my last one. I'm sure some other persons have questions. If the officer is not aggressive, if it's a white police officer, immediately now, with the climate being as it has been, I'm going to be a little shaky. I'm just gonna make the confession. I know that all the police officers are not bad police officers. Most of my experiences are tremendously good. And of course, we had one today because somebody broke out the door at the Zion Center last night. Okay, white police officer came out, very kind. They usually are very kind. But if I'm stopped at night or during the day, it's a different scenario. Because now I'm a black person, a black man driving by myself, and sometimes they may have the body cam on, sometimes they may not have the body cam on. And it just appears to me that it's a better option for me to just let them handcuff me and take me downtown and find out I am innocent, if I am innocent, or if I'm guilty, I'm going to be willing to pay the fine anyway. From a safety perspective,
Well,
I don't see the negative in them taking me to jail. I'd rather go to jail than take a chance, because I don't know if the guy's bad or not. That's the first thing. And this is Montgomery, Alabama, which we haven't had a whole lot of bad, but we have had some bad. And I've lived with this all of my life, from my first cousin, who's the first black graduate of Wetumpka High School, from another old lady in Wetumpka where the police officers raped her and her girlfriend when they were double dating. And she told me this to my face. So I've had to live through this in my family the whole time since I was in the first grade. It's not a good thought for me, though I'm the pastor of Mount Zion, to think I would be stopped by one or two white police officers. I'd rather just go to jail. Now, somebody may say I'm being a little bit too overly concerned, but listen, I don't get another chance if he pulls that Glock on me and fires.
Yeah.
I can get out of jail.
Yeah, and that's basically,
I'd rather lose a few $100s.
Yeah,
than to
and that's
take a
basically
chance
what I
on
said.
losing
I
my
think in
life.
my third slide there is that, although we all have constitutional rights, and we have and we should exercise them, but at the end of the day, what's primarily and what's most important to you should be getting home safely. And so that if that involves having to temporarily give up some of those rights and go to jail, rather than have to try to resist and have the situation escalate to a deadly force type situation, or someone being harmed, then that's the best thing to do. Because at the end of the day, if you make it out of the situation and you're not killed or you're not harmed, then I think that the best case scenario has happened.
Let me open it up. I see different people on the screen. So rather than everybody going in at one time, I'm going to go across the board and call your names. Okay. So Dr. Glenda Smith.
Good evening, everyone. And former Officer Thornton, thank you for this enlightening conversation. As a Black female who has been driving while Black more than once and pulled over, and when I asked on certain occasions why I was pulled over, because I was not speeding or doing anything illegal, they told me that the reason why I was pulled over because I was a Black female driving a nice car. How do you get around that? That's my first question. And my second question is, you've put everything on the person who is the potential victim of police brutality. Are there educational training programs for police officers? Because they do take a cell phone and think it's a gun, or they do think your wallet may be a firearm. And there is what we call implicit bias, where they just have it ingrained and that's just what it is. Are there training programs that bring this information out to those police officers so that we can stop some of the things that we've seen? And so for someone like Reverend Shuford, he doesn't have to worry about being a Black male driving a car or driving anywhere or going anywhere, because these police officers have had the appropriate training.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the officer who stopped you and told you he stopped you simply because you was Black was conducting an illegal stop, and he was conducting a stop that was fundamentally against the oath that he took as a law enforcement officer, because each one of us stood there with our right hand up to the good Lord, saying that as a law enforcement officer, our fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against depression, and innocent against depression and the weak. And so if he did something that's opposed to that, then he's violated the oath that he took as an officer, and he shouldn't be an officer. And unfortunately, there are quite a few of those out there who just shouldn't be an officer. And like I said earlier, they make it bad for all the others who go to work every day and do what they're constitutionally bound to do, and have to take the backlash of those in the law enforcement profession who aren't doing what they're supposed to. And that's very unfortunate. And I think that, with all that's going on in today's life, it's you can't defend that. And I think that there has to be there has to be something, some sort of something that happens in law enforcement to turn this situation around, and it has to be done swiftly, because people have lost confidence in law enforcement, and like I said, the good law enforcement officers are suffering just like the citizens are, because when you go to work every day and you try to take care of people and protect them, and they don't trust you, I can imagine that that's a bad feeling.
All right. I see Henry McQuarrie. If you don't have anything, we'll move on. I see, is that QUETTE 24? Kay Barlow. Reverend Frederick Tyson. Okay. QUETTE 24. If you're ready, go ahead.
Yes, this is Brother Westmore.
Okay, Marquette Westmore. He's actually in Pensacola, and yes, go ahead if you want to. You have a question?
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
All right. Now, I do know that you said the police officers basically have somewhat of law to lie. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we basically stop a wrongful search if they have pretty much the right to lie and say that we are a criminal, or, I mean, they did have suspicious activity, or we were, or noticed us to be a criminal coming from a crime scene or anything.
Like I said, short of basically exercising your right to articulate to the officer that you don't consent to searches, which your Fourth Amendment to the Constitution gives you a right to not be illegally searched, or items illegally seized from you. If an officer is intent on doing what's illegal, it's very difficult to actually to do anything about it other than complain to the supervisors. Because I can tell you that if I can tell you from my time as a supervisor at the police department, as a commander, if an officer is riding, you're going to know it. And so that's why I feel that a lot of change has to occur in law enforcement. Is supervisors and commanders and people like that have to be held to a different or higher standard, because you're going to get complaint after complaint after complaint on this particular officer, and something has to be done about it. And I think that's where the failure in the system is that if an officer's out conducting illegal searches on you, then I can guarantee you that you're not the only person he's done it to. And if people start complaining on the officer and he start getting a number of complaints and the supervisor do what he's supposed to do, then that can be stopped. But a lot of times though, people don't complain. They don't go to police headquarters and complain about a search or complain in court or anything like that, and it's not identified, or the supervisor don't do anything about it, which, like I said, there has to be something in law enforcement. There has to be some changes, and I think that it has to start with supervision, because I can tell you, I was thinking about the situation where Breonna Taylor situation, where the officers went in the middle of the night on a low drug charge. I mean, in today's environment, what supervisor approved that search? I mean, it had to be approved by a supervisor. What supervisor approved the search of a Black female's house at 3 o'clock in the a.m. on an off chance that someone was there with a low-level drug dealer was there? I mean, that to me reeks of an issue with supervision.
All right, Kay Barlow. Dennis Johnson.
You talk about complaining. What is the recourse if you have an encounter with an over and aggressive police officer? How do you complain?
Well, I'm not sure. Each city is different, but I can tell you that, like here in Montgomery, you can go to internal affairs, which here in the city of Montgomery, the internal affairs division was actually separated from the police department altogether, and it's actually an overall city function, where they hired like citizens. Basically, there's a citizen who's over that, and all complaints on police officers. If you don't feel like, first, I would recommend going to police headquarters and complaining to a supervisor. And if you don't feel like that you got justice there, then I would recommend going to internal affairs. If your internal affairs is like here in the city of Montgomery, where it's a separate entity from the actual police department. All city departments are actually bound by the city internal investigations, which is not, like I say, an entity of any department. And if that doesn't work, then I would recommend going to the mayor's office or your city council. Anyone who has authority over city government could potentially assist you in a situation like that.
Okay, part two, are police officers required to have their body cams on at every encounter?
Well, it just depends. I mean, I don't know and see, that's another issue with law enforcement, is there's not a national standard for anything in law enforcement. So in some jurisdictions, it's a requirement. In some jurisdictions, they don't even have they don't even have video body cams, so there's not, and that's something that, organizations like the one I work for are pushing for, is some sort of national standard in regards to police activities.
Okay, now part three, if you are engaged with an overly aggressive officer and you feel threatened and they ask you to get out of your vehicle, are you required to actually get out, or can you stay in your vehicle and ask for a supervisor?
Well, I mean, you can, this is what I would tell you. You can do that, and really an officer, unless he has suspicions to indicate that you may have a weapon or something like that in arm's reach, then really they're not supposed to ask you to get out of the vehicle. But they have to be able to articulate the fact that the reason why they asked you to get out of the vehicle is because they fear that you may have had some sort of weapon within arm's reach. And if you can do that, and like the Reverend said, if the situation doesn't become overly aggressive, then, you know, continue to do it. But when you see that the situation is becoming overly aggressive, I would recommend, you know, coming out of the vehicle and basically submitting to the demands of the officer so that the situation doesn't lead to something that, you know, can be seen as resisting arrest and then result in you being injured or even killed, you know.
Okay, thank you, Huey.
All right. Jay Osborne. Okay. Reverend Grayson Martin. Well, I guess that's Reverend Grayson Martin. G. Martin. Anything? Okay. Did I get Reverend Tyson already? I did. I'll save you for last, Sister Jametta. Reverend Payne. Okay. Linda Browning. All right. I saw Conway. Are you still there? All right. Jametta Gordine, another retired police officer of Mount Zion. Let's see what the retired female police officer is going to say. Are you there, Jametta? No comments? All right. Does anyone else have Pam Patton, the church secretary / administrative assistant? Pam, is there anything from you? Okay. Did everyone who had a chance to speak, is there a follow-up from any of you? All right. If not, Brother Huey, if we could get, if you'll get the printed part to our church, then we'll certainly make the copies and make them available to all of the churches of our conference and to the send it to the Episcopal district so Bishop could make it available for the state of Alabama and Florida, because it appears that most of those are would be pretty elementary for any of us in both states. Am I accurate in that?
I would agree. Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to thank you. I just asked him off the cuff. I had an idea. And I simply called him and said, hey, I want you to do this for us. And Pam, our administrative assistant, got us a flyer going. I think this has been very helpful. So thank you all for tuning in. And thank you mostly, Brother Huey, for such a well-informative forum tonight. You know what? We're going to end in prayer, and I'm going to ask, I think, Dr. Smith to end our meeting with prayer tonight. I was remembering Bishop George Crenshaw before he became bishop about 20 years ago. He was stopped in South Carolina. He was driving at the time a black electric 225. We called him the deuce and a quarter. Okay. And he was also, I think at the time, either the vice president or the president of the NAACP in that particular area. And they stopped him for the same reason Dr. Glenn Smith said they stopped her. He said just stopped because he's driving a nice car, had absolutely nothing, and then wanted to search his car. And he refused. And I guess after looking at his ID and him telling them who he was and they left him alone. But it's been happening a very long time. And unfortunately, as Brother Huey said, there are going to be some bad apples out there. We just pray that God will protect us and that we'll have so many good apples that they will weed out the bad apples and help us to identify the bad apples. So let's keep praying. And Huey, thank you for what you and what I know my other member, Sister Jametta, did as police officers, as well as the others who've been in law enforcement work even to this point. Reverend Dr. Smith, if you will close us out, and the Ministerial Alliance will then meet for 15 minutes on our private conference line. Thank you.
Can't show my video, but let us go to the Lord in prayer. Oh God, we thank you for bringing us all together tonight. We thank you, Lord, that you have put in our midst someone who understands what we need to do and how we need to do it when we are faced with situations with police officers. We pray, God, that you put a hedge of protection around us and guard our hearts and our minds as we go to and fro on our daily business, Lord. And that if we do encounter a police officer, God, we ask that that police officer be one of your kind and loving and follows his oath or her oath as they try to protect and serve us here in the state of Alabama and Florida and all over the world. We give you all the grace and all the peace and all the accolades that we can, oh God, because we know that you are our God and that you will protect us in our time of need. Be with Officer Thornton and be with all of us who have been on this call in this meeting. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you much. See you next time.